So part three is like how to take this idea from from history and turn it into something, like a kind of a campaign game, wargaming. So we're saying starts off in southern Mesopotamia, moves up to northern Mesopotamia, and then you get this expansion by sea. Cyprus, Crete, Greece. Oops. Cyprus, Greece. Stop it. What's going on? Cyrenaica, and then Sicily, blah blah, blah, and then on to what's they called, Corsica, and Spain. So you got this what we call it, expansion, mostly by water overseas, and then from island to island, mostly east to west, because the climate's basically the same around the Mediterranean, and later along the various rivers. Now the thing about that is, how can you turn that into a kind of good kind of military campaign? I don't know if you probably can. I mean, Foundry has, I think it's Foundry, has a range of kind of early Bronze Age figures, Trojan War type era figures. And so you could do it. I mean, particularly if you took an island, say like Crete, and you had different groups from different places setting up their little colonies around the coast, and you got some native population as well that's hostile to everyone. Then you could have some kind of it's like kind of Bronze Age version of the various skirmish games that you get that already exist. But will it be particularly appealing? I don't know if it would. I mean, the thing about this period in history is that you don't really have. Well, you do have horses, but they're not really big enough yet for cavalry. So you do have chariots. To say it's a Trojan War type deal where you got your infantry in various weird kinds of early armor. Guys in chariots. So I mean, you could make a kind of what's the word, skirmish game type deal out of that, or you could take a slightly bigger area and have like around the Aegean, and have lots of different colonies, like city states around the Aegean, fighting to have little battles. Again, it's this kind of early Bronze Age type battles with you'd have archers and chariots and infantry, but I mean it's perfectly fine. There's no reason why you shouldn't do that. It doesn't particularly appeal to me as a war game, to be honest. I don't know why exactly. Maybe it's the lack of cavalry. I don't know. So you could use this as the basis for a war game. Although I think it's better suited to a fantasy, really. We have the same thing, but the natives, so to speak, are the native hunter gatherers are orcs or goblins or something. Personally, now the other example, or other examples of the same thing, because you're talking about a kind of colonization, where the colonizers have got better technology, but relatively low in numbers, and the people being colonized are generally hunter gatherers, but have more numbers in total, though they're generally split up into smaller kind of tribal groups. And so other situations like that, which could you could possibly use similar ideas for, would be something like the colonization of America. We got a bunch of different nations. Like there was a computer game I played years ago called colonization, which was set in as Europeans colonizing America, and so you had the Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, British, whatever, setting up little colonies on the coastline, and then fighting or trading with the natives, and fighting or trading with each other. And that could possibly work. This would be a bit like what was it called, like Sharp Practice or whatever. All those games, so those skirmish games set in this period in America, except slightly earlier. So you have a bit more ropey muskets, and there'd be it'd be like the French and Indian War, except not, because it'd be basically like a half dozen or more different European colonies all fighting each other with their various Indian allies. So you could do that. It would be a bit like Sharp Practice, but with ropier muskets. So you could do that. I mean, that's again. I mean, that sells. The skirmish games set in that period sell already. So I don't know if you'd gain much by setting it like 100 years earlier in the 1600s than what you get now. So again, I mean, you could do it, but is it particularly sellable? I don't know. And the third option of running, you can't really call it a historical campaign, but so the equivalent of a historical campaign would be if you played it sort of space colonization, where you have colonize like a planet, and again the key point would be that they're low in number but with better technology versus some kind of alien planet with different tribes or whatever. But I suppose that doesn't really count. That's really more in the fantasy thing, really. So using this as a historical backdrop for games, I don't know if it works or not, but as a backdrop for a fantasy setting, then I think it works very well, and that's what's going to be next. Actually, thinking some more about this early Bronze Age and how you could fit it into a Wargames campaign, and I was thinking about using it as a basis for a kind of could be a fantasy setting, and I was just imagining sort of straightforward Dungeons and Dragons type game. All you do is you use the sea travel as fast travel, and so the different different kind of scenarios could be like hundreds of miles apart. But using this fast travel method. But I was thinking afterwards about it, and I read things like Gilgamesh years ago. I can't remember the details now. I can't remember how magical it was or how many kind of weird special creatures there were. But this early Bronze Age idea, so originally I kind of it became an idea sort of after looking at these foundry figures, these early Bronze Age. I think these are meant to be Mycenaean or Trojan or whatever. So they're quite interesting visually. I mean, I don't know what they're like in reality, but they're quite interesting visually, and I was thinking more of a kind of a halfway, or not a halfway house between fantasy and skirmish war game would be something like Saga, where you've got dudes like this with their early Bronze Age type armor, it's kind of a lot of it quite weird because they hadn't really figured out how to make it properly yet, or in some places. And then with a little bit of fantasy thrown in, whatever kind of sort of strange creatures like and I think another range I remember seeing that has a lot of kind of early Bronze Age-ish sort of style creatures and characters. So these were these beast men. There's a whole bunch of what's it? There's a whole bunch of like ancient-ish range. These hypaspists. There's a whole bunch more. The kind of elves and whatever. So I don't know. I was just thinking, if you imagined it as a kind of as this kind of fantasy, sort of more like kind of what's his name, Howard, the Conan dude. Yeah, you got these figures which are mostly skirmish fighter type things, but also, you know, with a little bit. So they're basically your leader is basically going to be some kind of hero type. You know, he's got some kind of element of some kind of magical element to them. So I don't know. It's just it's just a random thought. It's like an addendum really, that I can see this period as being suitable for a kind of very kind of low fantasy war games campaign, skirmish. You know, where you have your little warband with your leader, you know, in his chariot, and your rest of your guys, you know, dozen or so figures or whatever, and you're, you know, fighting some other factions. Warband, so a kind of warband saga type game, war game. I can think that could be. Its main issue would be that it's visually distinct from the other periods, which are usually, you know, ancient or dark age or medieval. It's kind of I don't know what to call it really. It's a sort of it's early Bronze Age, you know, before the Bronze Age collapse. So it's actually, you know, it's quite advanced in a way, but, you know, the technology is slightly, you know, slightly less, but, you know, it's still, you know, an organised, civilised sort of society. You know, all squashed together in amongst all these different barbarous groups, and, you know, I can see that being a good source for skirmish games. And then another one that I was so Lucid Eye was one that's got a lot of kind of good sort of early Bronze Age type figures. There's a Foundry that's got, you know, I don't know what they're like in size. They might not fit. And then there's Mears Miniatures, which is mostly Dark Age, but, you know, some of their stuff, especially the kind of more monstery stuff, could fit into that kind of early Bronze Age saga type deal. So this is just a random thought of you know, of how this early colonization of Europe could fit into a war games campaign. And as I say, I think it's slightly limited for a main kind of war games campaign, because, you know, you don't have any cavalry basically. But, you know, and as a kind of semi fantasy skirmish, I think maybe it could work. But that's just you know, randomly waffling.